Hey there, I'm Rachel Ehring, and you're listening to the Top Music Piano Podcast. Get inspired as we discuss creative resources, trends in piano pedagogy, ways to grow your income and streamline your studio, and new ways to engage your students each week. If you are a teacher who wants to go beyond the method books to create an innovative studio that fosters lifelong music makers, you've come to the right place. Hello, teacher friends. I am so glad that you are here joining me today. I know that many of you, if you are here in the US, are coming out of a very busy time of year, and hopefully summer is in sight and maybe you have some time off planned or at least a little bit of a change of pace. One of the things that I'm really looking forward to near the end of the summer is going to the NCKP conference. It's at the end of July. So if you're planning to be there, please let me know so that we can meet up in person. I made so many connections the last time I went 2 years ago, and I'm looking so forward to making even more connections this time around. Like I said, here in the US, it is the end of the school year. And to celebrate the end of the year, I recently took my teaching team out to lunch. So for those of you who might not know, my day job is at a music school that is run through a church here in Southern California. And so I manage a team of between 12 and 15 teachers who teach various instruments, and piano is by far the most popular instrument that we offer. So we went to lunch recently, and the conversation turned to note reading. One of the teachers shared that some of her students who have been with her for a couple of years are still struggling with reading the notes on the staff. I was actually kind of surprised to hear her say that because this particular teacher is fantastic. She is kind but disciplined in her teaching, and she has a great retention rate. Her students always play well at the recitals, and I never would have guessed that note reading was an issue with some of her students. She told us that it isn't all of her students, but just a few of them, and they've been working on it for quite a while now. And so she was wondering if other teachers had thoughts or suggestions. The other teachers at the table echoed the same sentiment, that they have some students who really struggle with reading the notes on the staff. Honestly, I was intrigued by this because I've also been struggling with the same thing with some of my students. And so I had thought maybe it was just me. It was nice to know that it's not just me, I guess. So today we're going to dive into this issue a little bit, and I'm going to share some of my experiences and thoughts about it. Now, I will tell you, you might have already guessed, I have not figured it all out, but I do have a few ideas that I hope might help you, and a few observations that I've made about these students who struggle with note reading. And then I want to pivot a little for the second part of the episode and talk about sight reading because I think it is very much related to reading notes. I think of sight reading as more advanced note reading. Of course, you have to be comfortable reading the notes on the staff before you can become a good sight reader. But I have some thoughts and ideas about sight reading, whether you are working on sight reading with your students or if you yourself would like to improve your own sight reading skills. So that's where we are headed near the end of this episode. But let's start by talking about note reading. I have recently inherited some students for various reasons from other teachers, and I've noticed that many of these students really struggle with knowing their notes on the staff. They came to me with music that looked like they should be comfortable reading most of the notes within the staff. Maybe not ledger lines and, things like that. But the reality was that when I asked them to name various notes, even the simple ones, they were completely guessing. Now, this is a little tricky because I don't want to put them back in an easier book and make them feel like they're going backwards, but they really don't have the note reading skills that they should have to be in the books that they are playing songs out of. Now, I'm going to make an observation here that might be a little controversial, but hear me out. The students that I inherited are all using the Faber Piano Adventures books. Now, I'm not saying that the Faber books caused this problem, but I do want to point it out because I think for those of us who are going to use the Faber books, we should be aware of this problem and figure out how to counteract it early on so that they don't get to book 1B or 2A and not be able to identify the notes on the staff, which is where these students are. I have a theory about the Faber books, and you can let me know if you agree or disagree. But I'm wondering if because they intentionally don't want students to be stuck in C position, the kids are finding their position based on that little note at the beginning of each song. If you teach from the Faber books, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It says 3 on G or 2 on A. And often we're in a little bit of a hurry, and so we help our students find that first note. And then they just fumble along reading the intervals and notes up and down and never actually read the exact notes on the staff. Now, I want to pause here and say that I actually do want my students to learn to read intervals and notes going up and down. That is absolutely an essential part of sight reading, is being able to see those patterns and not having to think about every single note name on the staff. When you get to more difficult music, that is going to slow you down way too much. However, it becomes a problem when they are only doing this technique of reading notes up and down and don't know the actual note names. I think we can all agree that this is a problem, but what do we do about it? The first thing I have tried to do is put myself in their shoes. As teachers, we've been reading these notes for years, many of us for more decades than we care to admit. But if you look at the staff from their perspective, there's a lot going on. There are a bunch of lines that all blur together, and then there are little dots everywhere, and we're asking them to count and use specific fingers, so that means there's numbers everywhere. And there are clefs and time signatures and dynamics and who knows what else. It really is a lot for a little brain to process. I believe that often the problem is that we're just asking them to do too many things at once with numbers and letters everywhere. I recently had a student who was really struggling with reading both notes and rhythms. So I took just the rhythm and wrote it separately on a whiteboard. And then I took the notes and wrote them separately on the whiteboard. And when he saw only one element at a time, he was able to figure it out. He even said to me, that makes so much more sense when it's separated out like that. I think this is one strategy that you can try. Pull out the different elements and teach them separately. In addition to that, I really think we need to just slow down and take a step back. Something that I see in some of my teachers, as well as myself at times, is this need to teach a new song every week and always be turning the page, even when the previous page isn't learned yet. Now, I know this can also go the opposite way too, where I've seen teachers who won't let a student pass to the next song until the previous one is perfect. So I think that can also be a problem. I think we have to strike a balance. My experience recently, though, is that the former is often the case, where we are just moving too quickly. We all know that students have short attention spans, so we move on to the next thing to keep their interest, and before we know it, we've gotten halfway through the book and they still don't know their note names. Slowing everything down is a great place to start. So one way that I do this is that I have more activities outside of the method books. And I've been using these every week or most weeks with my students to help with their note reading. There are all kinds of things that you can do, but I'll just give you a few simple ideas. I recently had Megan Desmarais on the podcast talking about her Easy Notes tools that she sells. So I've been using the Easy Notes music tiles, which are little tiny tiles that fit perfectly on the keys, and each one has one staff note on it. So you can pick out just the staff notes that you want to focus on and have the student place them on the correct keys. Now, of course, you could turn it into a game and maybe time them, or if you have a wiggly student, you could put them in a bowl across the room where they would have to run back and forth to grab a tile and put it on the correct key. This also helps remind students that each note on the staff is a specific key on the piano. Because of the way many of us are teaching now, where we introduce the full keyboard before we teach notes on the staff, some of my students think that when they see a D on the staff, that they can play any D on the piano. So I have to remind them that it's actually a specific key, not just any D on the piano. I also got the magnetic whiteboard from Very Piano, which is Megan Desmarais, who I just mentioned. So I've been using that to review notes. Sometimes I write the notes and have the student name it, But I also like to let them write the notes. And of course, kids love whiteboards and markers and magnets. So it's a nice tactical exercise for them and just another way to reinforce the note names where they have to actually think, where am I going to put note G or note D? Something that I haven't mentioned yet is using anchor notes or reference notes. I feel like there's another word for them too, but I can't think of it right now. So I'll just call them anchor notes. This is the idea that we teach certain anchor notes and help the kids learn those really, really well. And then they can use the system that we talked about earlier of reading the patterns up and down and using intervals to figure out the rest of the notes. So a really obvious example of this that every kid knows is middle C. It looks different than all the other notes, so kids immediately recognize it as middle C, and then they can use it to figure out the notes right above and below it. But what if they could recognize treble G and bass F just as quickly as middle C? Again, if you want to teach anchor notes, you have to slow down and do so much repetition until it finally sticks with them. I think that using anchor notes might be the way to be successful at teaching the Faber series. I would love to know if you have done that in your studio and how it worked for you. I've also been doing a lot of Flash Note Derby on the iPad with my students. I know a lot of you are familiar with the Flash Note Derby game. I think I had to buy it for maybe $2.99 or something. It is a paid app, but the students love it. And I love it because you can choose exactly which notes on the staff you want it to test the kids on. And then it will only test on those specific notes. So sometimes if a student's struggling, I only choose 3 notes. And then it will ask 10 questions, but it's only those 3 notes over and over. It sounds way too simple and basic, but sometimes that's exactly what the student needs. And sometimes they struggle with even just those 3 notes. And so they might feel a little discouraged that they missed some, even though they know it was only 3 notes. So we play it again right away. And by the second time around, they've mastered those 3 notes. And then maybe we'll add 1 more note. And you know what? We might have to do the same 3 notes again the next week. I think you all know that teaching the piano takes a lot of patience. I guess I'm sharing these thoughts with you because I want you to know that if you have students who are struggling with note reading, you are not alone. I want to encourage you to be patient with them. Reading music is really like learning a new language, and it takes time to become fluent. But it will happen if you stay the course and give it time. Now, I told you that I also wanted to talk a little about sight reading because I believe that strong note reading skills are the foundation for good sight reading skills. Let me ask you, have you ever been scared to sight read something? You can be honest. It could have been anything. Maybe a singer asked you to run through a song with them, or you were thrown a surprise song during a choir rehearsal. If you feel that pit in your stomach whenever someone asks you to sight read something, especially if you have to do it in front of people, keep listening. I actually love sight reading, and it has been my superpower in many situations. I don't know that sight reading is a particularly useful superpower in the world as a whole, but I guess I'll take what I can get. I should probably back this up and tell you that when I started piano lessons in first grade, I was a disaster. Of course, it was a different time, and pedagogy was different back then. So my teacher started me immediately reading notes on the staff in the first lesson, and I just did not get it. I think I was actually trying to read where the stems were on the staff rather than the note heads. I probably should have started the episode with this story because yikes, right? Reading the stems instead of the note heads, like what was I thinking? But I was 7, so there you go. My teacher had to put me back in the most basic pre-beginner book. I think she even said that she had never had to do that before, but I distinctly remember having to play whole note middle Cs with each hand for the entire week after she put me back in that book. That was all I got to practice for that week, but it worked. Once I caught on, I was off, and I used to read through any books I could get my hands on. I would sight read from the hymnal. I would go back and sight read through old books, although some of the pieces I'd played before, so I guess that wasn't true sight reading, but it still helped. And I would love when we would go to the music store because I usually came home with a couple of books that I'd picked out, and I would sit down and sight read through as much of the book as I could. I think that attitude that sight reading was fun and exciting, and the avenue to playing new music has served me really well. If you've been around for a while, you know that I had a career in collaborative piano for many years. And collaborative pianists are expected to sight read. It's just part of the job. And if you want to be a successful collaborative pianist, you just have to sight read. Of course, there were times when I was handed something that was super scary to sight read, but I had to figure out how to get through it. So I came up with tricks to play even the hardest pieces where I couldn't possibly sight read all of the notes. Okay, so you heard it here first. I'm actually working on a 7-part framework for pianists to dramatically improve their sight reading. I'm really excited about it because I think it's going to have a huge impact for pianists who struggle with their sight reading, which is many of us. But it's not quite ready to unveil yet. I'm letting the cat out of the bag a little bit early because I'm so excited about it, but I do have something to offer you in the meantime while I'm finishing it. I created a free guide that will help jumpstart your sight reading. It's a smaller sample of what the 7-part framework is going to be. So the guide will do 2 things for you. First of all, it will improve your sight reading. It's called 5 Ways to Improve Your Sight Reading Immediately, and it gives you some tips that will be quick wins for your reading skills. And secondly, it will get you on my list so that when the 7-part framework is finished, you will be the first to hear about it. I'm planning to launch it to my email list in just a couple of weeks here. So be sure to go to the link in the show notes to get your free sight reading guide so that you can get on the list to find out about the 7-part framework. You can also go to my website, rachelarring.com. I've put up a little pop-up so that you can easily find the free sight reading guide there. I hope that this short episode has been helpful for you. I would love to hear your ideas about teaching note reading to your students. You can find me on Instagram at rachelarring and share all of your best tips with me that I can use with my students and maybe even share on the podcast in another episode. That's all for this week. Next week, I will be back with another interview episode, so I can't wait to talk to you then. I'm Rachel Arring, and you've been listening to the Top Music Piano Podcast. I'll talk with you soon.
How do you keep up to date with all the latest trends and research into music education? How do you connect with other teachers around the world and make sure your teaching stays fresh and relevant for students of all ages and stages both now and into the future? I created our Top Music Pro membership to be the one-stop shop for music teaching resources, training, support and community, and I'd love for you to come and join us inside. With over 40 comprehensive training courses, hundreds of teaching demonstrations and lesson plans, free monthly sheet music, discounts, and all the business and pedagogy support you could ever need, Top Music Pro is the community you've been looking for. If you're ready to level up your learning from the podcast and join thousands of other teachers in our global network, head over to topmusicpro.com today.